So imagine you're standing right at the base of this massive hydroelectric dam, and for years people have been arguing about whether the concrete is cracking, right?
Right, right.
And you've got the House representatives standing right up on the wall, like shouting through megaphones about patching the leaks this exact second. But then you have the Senate sitting in this quiet, wood-paneled room miles away, and they're just calmly debating the 40-year history of water pressure.
That is honestly the perfect analogy.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the clock is just ticking down to a midnight deadline that could literally shut off the power to the entire valley.
That is precisely what it feels like to watch the legislative branch function on a high-stress day.
Mm-hmm.
There's just this incredible disconnect between the sheer panic of the deadlines and the incredibly dry, methodical paperwork being filed to actually address them.
Welcome to Congress in Context. If you're joining us for this deep dive, you know we don't just read the headlines here. We take the raw source material, like the actual giant stack of bills, resolutions, and transcripts generated by the United States Congress, and we figure out how the machine actually works.
And looking at this snapshot from June 10th, 2026, the machine is, well, it's running hot.
It's running extremely hot. I mean, Congress is grappling with existential deadlines right now. We have national security surveillance programs on the verge of expiring. We've got these massive domestic funding battles. And then you have these highly specific local issues just fighting for oxygen in the middle of these national partisan wars. And really, the only way to understand what is truly meant to become law versus what is just, a political bumper sticker is to look at the actual text.
Okay, let's unpack this. With so much paperwork generated in a single day, I mean, how much of this is actually meant to become law and how much is just political messaging?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, you have to read the bills to find out. So we are going to go through every single piece of legislation that moved on this day. We're not skipping anything. Let's start with what actually passed on the floor.
Sounds good.
The biggest one in the room is S2, the Secure America Act. This is a massive reconciliation bill that has officially become Public Law 1/1998, and it appropriates an absolutely staggering $17 billion for the Department of Homeland Security. We're talking $9.55 billion for CBP Customs and Border Protection and $7.45 billion for ICE.
Yeah, and when you hear a number like $17 billion, it's so easy to just think of it as a giant blank check, right?
Easily.
But what's fascinating here is that the text of S2 is absolutely defined by its restrictions. And we always remind our listeners, we aren't taking a side on the politics here. We are just reading the law. And the text explicitly designates these funds for non-immigration enforcement.
Wait, really? ICE and CBP, but for non-immigration enforcement? How does that even work mechanically?
All right, sounds like an oxymoron. But it means the money is heavily fenced off for things like counter-narcotics, human trafficking interdiction, and customs trade enforcement. But it goes even further into the administrative weeds. The bill explicitly bars the hiring of what they call processing coordinators after October 31st, 2028.
Processing coordinators, is that like just a bureaucratic title?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
They are the civilian personnel who handle the intake, the welfare checks, and the transport of detainees. So by legally capping their hiring after 2028, Congress is essentially forcing a future operational bottleneck.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They're dictating exactly how these agencies can manage their facilities down the road. So it's this massive influx of cash, but it comes with heavy, highly specific operational handcuffs.
That is fascinating. Okay, now, moving from the border to domestic financial integrity, the House passed a flurry of bills focused on fraud. Let's look at H.R. 7892, the No Aid for Ghost Students Act of 2026. This passed the House 249 to 172. It requires the Department of Education to use identity fraud detection systems for the AFSI. But, what exactly is a ghost student?
So a ghost student is essentially a fabricated identity, or in a lot of cases, a stolen real identity that's used by crime rings to enroll in online community college courses.
Just to get the money?
Solely to pocket the federal financial aid payouts, yeah. Because federal student aid has traditionally relied on self-reported data that's verified after the fact, these really sophisticated networks have been draining millions from the system. So this bill mandates front-end biometric or advanced identity verification before a single dollar is actually disbursed.
Which explains the push for the next one, H.R. 8312, the Fraud Prevention and Accountability Act. That one passed 240 to 181. It establishes permanent fraud prevention functions in the Treasury and creates a permanent inspector general for fraud, accountability, and recovery. But why the Treasury? Why not, like, the FBI?
Because the Treasury is the entity actually writing the checks.
Yeah.
Historically, inspector generals or IGs, they come in after the money is already gone to figure out who stole it.
Right. They're the cleanup crew.
Exactly. But Representative Sessions argued passionately on the floor that this bill shifts the entire paradigm. It builds an architecture within the Treasury designed to spot the anomaly in the payment algorithm before the funds ever leave the government's accounts.
But that creates a lot of friction, right? I mean, which brings us to H.R. 8464, the Stopping Fraudulent Payments Act. It passed the House 218 to 200, so a much tighter margin there. It amends Title 31 to authorize the government to pause and segment payments.
And this is where you see the real mechanical debate over executive power. On paper, pausing a payment sounds like common sense. If an algorithm flags a batch of payments as potentially fraudulent, the Treasury can freeze them.
Seems reasonable.
Right, but Democrats, led by Representative Walkinshaw, argue that this gives unelected bureaucrats arbitrary authority to delay much-needed federal aid, like disaster relief or housing assistance.
Oh, based on an algorithm.
Exactly, based on mere algorithmic suspicion, potentially starving out legitimate citizens who desperately need those funds today.
It's the classic tension between security and accessibility. And they kept hammering this theme. They passed H.R. 8467, the Zeroing Out Monetary Benefits Improperly Expended Act. Gotta love the acronyms. This reforms the Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019.
Yeah, and this one passed by suspending the rules, which means there was broad bipartisan agreement on it. It essentially updates the legal definitions of what constitutes an improper payment, making it a lot easier for agencies to report and basically claw back funds that were sent to the wrong bank accounts.
And rounding out that block, we have H.R. 8340, the Taxpayer Funds Oversight and Accountability Act, also passed via suspension. This modifies the government-wide financial management plan, which sounds incredibly dry, but it's essentially demanding that every federal agency sing from the same sheet music when it comes to accounting software, right?
That's exactly it. It's plugging the administrative leaks. But, while the House is trying to track down missing dollars, the looming crisis of the day revolves around national security.
Yes. Here is where the clock is really ticking the loudest. Representative Crawford introduced H.R. 9238. This bill extends Title VII of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which most people just know as FISA, until July 2, 2026.
Right, and to understand the skates here, you really have to understand what Section 702 of FISA actually does. It allows the U.S. government to collect the communications of non-Americans located abroad and to do it without a warrant. But because the internet is obviously global, Americans' communications inevitably get swept up in that dragnet if they happen to be talking to a foreign target.
And the intelligence community relies on this heavily, right?
Heavily is an understatement. According to the intelligence briefings discussed on the floor, information gathered under Section 702 makes up roughly 60% of the intelligence presented to the president in the daily briefing.
Wow.
60%.
Yeah. It is the absolute backbone of modern counterterrorism and espionage. But its legal authorization is on the verge of completely expiring.
So H.R. 9238 isn't actually fixing the system, it's just hitting the snooze button.
Exactly.
It's a desperate attempt to buy just a few more weeks of negotiation time until July 2nd to prevent the entire apparatus from just going dark.
Exactly. And as we'll see when we look at the Senate side later, buying time might not even be enough to break the fundamental standoff over constitutional rights.
Okay, so let's shift over to the Senate's floor actions. They passed S. 872, the Stop Secret Spending Act of 2025. This requires other transaction agreements to be reported to USAspending.gov. Now, I consider myself pretty well informed on this stuff, but I have no idea what an other transaction agreement is. Don't worry, most people don't. It's a massive loophole in federal procurement. Usually, when the government buys something, there are strict bidding rules, public notices, heavy bureaucracy to ensure fairness. But an other transaction agreement, or OTA, is a fast-track contract used primarily by the Department of Defense to quickly fund research and development.
So like throwing money at a tech startup to build a drone prototype.
Precisely.
So it bypasses the red tape?
It completely bypasses the red tape, but it also bypasses public visibility. Billions of dollars are spent this way. S-872 simply says, hey, if you spend taxpayer money, even through this fast-track system, you have to log it on the public spending website so watchdogs can actually see it.
Makes sense. They also passed a bundle of bills en bloc, which, for you listening, is a procedural move where they group non-controversial bills together and pass them with a single voice vote just to save time. One of those was S736, a minor technical corrections bill, but another was S825, the Fighting Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Act of 2025.
And this is a really vital piece of legislation for public safety officers. It establishes federal programs designed specifically to recognize the compounding daily trauma faced by police, firefighters, and EMTs.
Right.
It creates confidential mental health support structures that don't jeopardize their employment status, which has always been a huge barrier.
Then we have S3041, the Tribal Warrant Fairness Act, which allows U.S. Marshals to assist in tribal criminal matters. But wait, why wouldn't they be allowed to do that already?
Because jurisdiction on tribal lands is incredibly complex. Historically, if a crime happens on a reservation, tribal police handle it, or the FBI handles it if it's a major felony. But tribal police often lack the resources to track down fugitives who flee the reservation boundaries.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so this bill provides a legal bridge, allowing the U.S. Marshals, who are the premier fugitive hunters in the world, to directly execute tribal warrants. It closes a massive loophole that criminals were actively exploiting.
Wow. They also passed S4394, the Promoting Police Leadership Act. This improves the CUPS program for training command-level personnel.
Right, so the COMPS program usually focuses on putting more officers on the street. This pivots the funding to middle management. It teaches lieutenants and captains modern de-escalation, constitutional policing, and administrative oversight. It's basically an acknowledgement that police culture is set by middle management.
Next up is S1890, the Carla Walker Act. This establishes a grant program for forensic genetic genealogy.
This is a fascinating leap in criminal justice technology. Forensic genetic genealogy is exactly what caught the Golden State Killer.
Right, uploading the DNA to those ancestry sites.
Exactly. It's taking a suspect's DNA from a crime scene, uploading it to commercial ancestry databases, and building a family tree backward to find the suspect. But it is incredibly expensive to do. This bill gives local police departments the federal funding they need to access this private technology to solve cold cases.
Over in the House, we have H.R. 5508, which was just received by the Senate. It accelerates workplace time to contract under the National Labor Relations Act.
And this is a huge priority for labor unions. Often, a workplace will successfully vote to unionize, but then the corporation will just drag out the initial contract negotiations for years, effectively killing the union's momentum. This bill puts strict federal timelines on how quickly a first contract must be negotiated under the NLRA.
We also saw the president's signature today on two items. Public Law 1/1996, which was originally H.R. 3490, requiring a Government Accountability Office report on esophageal cancer, and Public Law 1/1997, which was S2393, authorizing a major VA medical facility project in St. Louis.
Yeah, and it's always a good reminder that beneath all the partisan warfare we talk about, the basic machinery of government building hospitals, commissioning health studies, it does continue to slowly grind forward.
Speaking of that partisan warfare, the floor speeches today were intense. Representative Hageman gave a speech pushing for the Stop Climate Shakedowns Act. She argued that state-level lawsuits targeting fossil fuel producers are climate shakedowns designed to bankrupt the energy sector. And just to reiterate, we aren't endorsing any position here, just imparting the source material. We also heard from Representative Amin, who pushed the Iranian Temporary Immigration Relief Act, arguing it supports scientific innovation by retaining Iranian-American academics.
And just looking at this strictly as analysts, you see two completely divergent worldviews competing for microphone time on the same day. One is focused on protecting traditional domestic industries from judicial activism, and the other is focused on leveraging immigration for global technological competitiveness.
And in a subtle but honestly pretty sharp procedural move, Representative DeLuzio officially removed his name as a co-sponsor from H.R. 1229.
Yeah, and you rarely see that happen by accident. Removing a name means either the text of the bill was altered in a way the member just couldn't support anymore, or the political winds in their home district shifted so drastically that they had to publicly distance themselves from the legislation.
Okay, let's move into the newly introduced House legislation for Juneteenth. The House is basically the engine room of ideas, and they dropped a massive slate of bills today. And I want to go through every single one because the details really matter.
Let's do it.
We start with H.R. 9236 by Representative Yakim, amending the PROTECT Act for high-risk missing person alerts.
So the PROTECT Act is the law that established the Amber Alert system. But Amber Alerts are strictly for abducted children. H.R. 9236 tries to expand that infrastructure to create rapid, nationwide broadcast alerts for high-risk adults.
Like silver alerts.
Kinda, yeah, like a veteran experiencing a severe mental health crisis or an elderly person with Alzheimer's who wanders off.
Got it. Then there's H.R. 9237 from Representative Boast. This improves benefits and administration for veterans at the VA.
A persistent issue, obviously. The VA is a massive bureaucracy, and this bill specifically targets the claims processing system, trying to mandate electronic records transfers to cut down the years-long backlog veterans face when they're just applying for disability.
H.R. 9239 by Representative Crow. This puts limitations on judgments and awards under Section 1304 of Title 31. What is Section 1304?
Section 1304 governs what's known as the Judgment Fund. It's this indefinite, permanent treasury account used to pay out lawsuits against the United States government. If a federal agency gets sued and loses, the money usually comes from here. Representative Crow's bill is attempting to put guardrails on how much can be paid out in specific types of liability claims, essentially trying to protect the Treasury from massive, unchecked legal settlements.
Okay, moving on to H.R. 9240 by Representative Donalds. It grants the GAO access to state records for audits. But wait, can't the federal government already audit states?
Not automatically, no. The Government Accountability Office audits federal agencies. But when federal money is given to a state like Medicaid or highway funds, the state manages it. The GAO often hits a brick wall trying to subpoena state-level data to see how the federal money was actually spent. So this bill legally mandates state cooperation as a condition of receiving those federal grants in the first place.
Next, two from Representative Hamadeh. H.R. 9241 improves oversight of the disposition of accountable property in theaters of operation. And H.R. 9242 is the No Equipment Left Behind Act of 2026.
And both of these are direct legislative reactions to the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan a few years ago. When the military leaves the theater of operation, billions of dollars of vehicles, weapons, and tech are often left behind or just destroyed because shipping them back is too costly.
Right, we saw those images.
Exactly. These bills mandate strict, itemized accounting and require the Department of Defense to formulate extraction plans for sensitive equipment long before withdrawal is ever officially ordered.
H.R. 9244 by Representative Harrigan regulates state taxation of interstate commerce.
If you run a small online business, you are subjected to the absolute nightmare of navigating thousands of different county and state tax jurisdictions every time you ship a product across state lines. This bill is an attempt by Congress to assert its constitutional authority to regulate interstate commerce by creating a simplified, unified tax threshold for small businesses operating nationwide.
H.R. 9245 from Representative Hayes. This establishes a grant program supporting teacher and school leader induction programs. What does induction mean in this educational context?
In education, induction refers to the comprehensive mentorship and training provided to a teacher during their first 3 years on the job. We have a massive teacher retention crisis in this country. Most teachers who quit do so within their first 5 years.
Yeah, burnout is huge.
Exactly. This federal grant provides funding for schools to pair rookie teachers with veteran mentors, reducing that burnout and stabilizing the workforce.
H.R. 9246 by Representative Hernandez enables Puerto Rico to determine its political status.
A massive, ongoing constitutional issue. This bill would legally bind the U.S. Congress to respect a plebiscite, a direct vote by the people of Puerto Rico to choose either full statehood, full independence, or sovereignty in free association with the United States. It's about fundamentally settling a century-old colonial legacy.
H.R. 9247 by Representative Houchin requires VA suicide prevention coordinators at medical centers.
While the VA has a national hotline, this mandates that every single physical VA medical center has a dedicated on-site professional whose sole job is to intercept high-risk veterans walking through the door.
So they don't get lost in the shuffle.
Right, to navigate them immediately to crisis care, completely bypassing the standard appointment desk.
H.R. 9248 by Representative Hurd amends the FAST Act to include recreation activities as covered projects.
The FAST Act is a major infrastructure law that speeds up the environmental permitting process for things like highways and bridges. By defining recreation activities as covered projects, this bill allows things like massive national park renovations, new trail systems, and public boating infrastructure to bypass years of red tape.
H.R. 9249 from Representative Mouliner limits immigration for aliens previously employed by entities on the DoD's 1260H list. The 1260H list.
The 1260H list is a registry maintained by the Pentagon of Chinese military companies operating directly or indirectly in the United States. This bill is a hardline counter-espionage measure. It states that if you ever worked for one of those blacklisted tech or manufacturing firms, you are presumptively barred from receiving a U.S. visa. It's closing a back door for intellectual property theft.
Okay, H.R. 19250 by Representative Westerman modernizes the National Park Service and related agencies for America's 250th anniversary.
The semi-quincentennial is coming up in 2026. This is a massive appropriations push to clear the multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog in our national parks, fixing roads, updating visitor centers, and securing historical sites before the expected surge in tourism.
H.R. 9251 by Representative Morrison provides funding for school personnel to administer opioid overdose drugs.
The tragic reality is that fentanyl has heavily infiltrated high schools. Schools want to stock naloxone, but the medication is expensive, and staff need liability training. This federal grant covers both the purchase of the life-saving drugs and the training for school nurses and teachers to legally administer them without fear of lawsuits.
We have two bills from Representative Ross. H.R. 9252 requires a State Department report on energy in Moldova.
Moldova sits geographically right next to Ukraine and has historically been entirely dependent on Russian gas. If Russia shuts off a pipeline, Moldova freezes.
Right.
This bill forces the State Department to formally audit Moldova's energy grid and propose strategies for the U.S. to help them achieve energy independence, which stabilizes the whole region.
And H.R. 9253, also from Ross, empowers independent music creators to collectively negotiate with dominant online platforms.
Right now, independent artists have zero leverage against massive streaming algorithms. If they try to unionize or collectively bargain for better per-stream payout rates, they can actually be sued under antitrust laws for collusion.
Wait, really?
Yes. So this bill creates an antitrust exemption, allowing indie musicians to band together and negotiate with the tech giants as a single block.
Wow. Now, H.R. 9254 from Representative Roy specifies that the Southern Poverty Law Center shall not be treated as a 501c3 organization. And again, maintaining our objectivity, looking at this structurally, this is an incredible use of legislative power.
It truly is.
Yeah.
The 501c3 designation is granted by the IRS. It makes donations to a group tax deductible. Representative Roy's bill is attempting to use congressional statute to permanently strip that tax-exempt status from a specific named organization due to ideological conflicts regarding how that organization categorizes hate groups. It highlights how the tax code itself is frequently weaponized in political battles.
H.R. 9255 by Representative Thompson establishes requirements for timeshare sales transparency.
The timeshare industry is notoriously famous for high-pressure sales tactics and incredibly complex exit clauses. This bill creates a federal cooling-off period. It mandates plain language disclosures of maintenance fees and a federally protected window where a consumer can cancel a contract without any penalty.
H.R. 9256 from Representative Wilson requires a DoD report on child soldiering in Africa.
Under current law, the U.S. is not supposed to provide military aid to countries that utilize child soldiers. However, waivers are frequently granted for strategic reasons. This bill demands absolute transparency, forcing the Pentagon to publish the unclassified evidence of child conscription in partner nations, which makes it politically a lot harder to quietly grant those waivers.
We also saw several resolutions introduced. HRS 195 by Representative Bonamici disapproves of the HHS rule, restoring flexibility in the Child Care and Development Fund.
This utilizes what's called the Congressional Review Act. When an executive agency like HHS writes a new rule, Congress has a limited window to overrule it with a resolution of disapproval. Here, they are arguing the HHS rule actually weakens child care quality standards under the guise of flexibility.
HRS 1355 by Representative Carter designates the week of June 14, 2026 as National Men's Health Week. And HRS 1356 by Representative Costa commemorates the Day of Portugal, celebrating Portuguese-American heritage.
Just standard, but culturally vital, civic recognition resolution.
Then we have HRS 1333 and HRS 1345, which are rules providing for consideration of other bills, and HRS 1335, which condemns actors seeking to defraud the U.S. government.
Which perfectly bookends the House's entire theme for the day.
Yeah.
From the binding legislation to the symbolic resolutions, the House was hyper-focused on financial integrity and clawing back fraudulent funds.
Okay, let's step across the Capitol to the Senate side. The Senate introduced a totally different flavor of legislation today, looking far more at systemic, nationwide infrastructure and civil rights. We start with S. 4728 by Senator Warner. It requires the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, FISA, to work with sector risk management agencies on sector-specific plans.
Right, think about it this way. The cyber threats facing a Wall Street bank are entirely different from the cyber threats facing a rural water treatment plant. CISA is the overarching federal cyber agency, but this bill forces them to physically embed with the specific agencies that oversee finance, energy, and agriculture.
Building specific firewalls for each.
Exactly. Building bespoke sector-specific firewalls rather than just relying on a one-size-fits-all defense.
S4729 from Senator Cotton imposes mandatory minimums for smuggling biological agents.
We obviously saw the catastrophic global impact of a pandemic. This bill treats the illicit smuggling of biological materials, whether by a terrorist organization or a rogue corporate researcher, as essentially equivalent to the highest tier of nuclear smuggling, removing a judge's discretion and ensuring decades in federal prison.
S4730 by Senator Hickenlooper provides capacity-building grants for community college agriculture programs.
The average age of the American farmer right now is approaching 60. We have a looming agricultural workforce crisis. This bill bypasses massive universities and funnels federal grant money directly to rural two-year community colleges to teach modern precision agriculture, drone soil analysis, and sustainable farming.
S4731 by Senator Lujan establishes subaccounts in the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund.
Over the past decade, Congress has settled massive lawsuits with Native American tribes over stolen water rights, promising billions in infrastructure to bring clean water to reservations. But the money often gets stuck in a massive single treasury account.
So it's hard to actually get the cash out.
Right. By establishing dedicated subaccounts for each tribe, this bill mechanically ensures the Treasury can't commingle the funds, and the specific tribes can draw down their money immediately.
S4732 from Senator Merkley authorizes the president to declare a smoke emergency.
We've all seen the skies turn orange from cross-border wildfires. Currently, the Stafford Act allows the president to declare a disaster for a fire, releasing FEMA funds. But what if your city isn't on fire, but is paralyzed by hazardous smoke blowing in from Canada?
Yeah, like New York City last year.
Exactly. This bill creates a new legal category, allowing the federal government to deploy emergency air purifiers and medical aid to cities suffocating from secondary smoke.
S4733 by Senator Kaine is a grant program for teacher and school leader induction program.
And this is the exact Senate companion to Representative Hayes' bill, H.R. 9245, that we saw in the House. The fact that both chambers introduced it on the exact same day shows highly coordinated bicameral momentum to address teacher retention.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting. S4734. We notice a quirk in the Congressional record. This alphanumeric number actually appears twice in the source material for the day.
Yes, the clerks in Congress are human, and administrative misprints happen in the rush to publish the daily record. It appears once as a bill introduced by Senator Warren, requiring a national security review of private investment companies acquiring defense suppliers.
Right, basically checking to see if foreign money is buying up our missile parts manufacturers through shell companies.
Exactly. But then S4734 appears again under the Foreign Relations Committee markups as the Reciprocal Passport Validity Act. The Senate parliamentarian will eventually have to renumber one of them to untangle the legislative knot.
It's a funny little procedural hiccup. Moving on, S4735 by Senator Merkley establishes procedures for determining public interest regarding greenhouse gas emissions.
When the federal government permits a new natural gas pipeline, they must legally prove it is in the public interest. Historically, that just meant, does it lower energy prices? This bill forcefully rewrites that legal definition.
To include climate change.
Yes, mandating that the long-term cost of greenhouse gas emissions and climate damage must be mathematically subtracted from the project's economic value before it can be declared in the public interest.
S4736 by Senator Hassan creates opportunities for older individuals to volunteer at facilities.
It addresses the epidemic of senior isolation by creating federal liability protections and matching programs for seniors to volunteer in child care centers and after-school programs, bridging the generational divide.
S4737 from Senator Baldwin expands housing program eligibility for volunteer first responders.
Rural fire departments rely almost entirely on volunteers, but housing costs are pricing those volunteers out of the communities they serve. This bill tweaks the Department of Housing and Urban Development rules, allowing volunteer hours to essentially count as income for the purposes of qualifying for specific first-time homebuyer assistance programs.
Okay, brace yourself. We have 3 FISA reform bills from Senator Wyden introduced back-to-back. S4738 requires warrants for queries of U.S. persons' communications. S4739 prohibits reverse targeting of U.S. persons. And S4740 amends FISA to improve transparency.
This is Wyden's legislative barrage, basically setting the terms of engagement for that July 2nd deadline we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
S-4738 is the heavy hitter demanding a strict probable cause warrant before an intelligence analyst can search the database for an American's name. S-4739 targets a specific loophole, reverse targeting.
What exactly is reverse targeting?
It's when the government doesn't have a warrant for an American, so instead they legally target a foreigner that the American talks to every day, specifically to sweep up the American's communications.
Oh, that's sneaky.
Yeah, Wyden's bill explicitly criminalizes this intelligence backdoor, and S-4740 forces the FISA court, which operates in total secrecy, to declassify and publish its major legal opinions so the public actually knows how the law is being interpreted.
S-4741 by Senator Banks requires certain commercial entities to implement age verification.
This enters the incredibly fraught debate over child safety online. It legally compels social media platforms and adult content sites to use third-party age verification software like uploading a driver's license before granting access. But, it raises massive privacy concerns regarding who actually holds that biometric data.
S-4742 from Senator Kelly authorizes labor market data collection on artificial intelligence impacts.
We spend a lot of time guessing about AI replacing jobs. Senator Kelly's bill mandates the Bureau of Labor Statistics to create new statistical categories and physically track, sector by sector, exactly how many human hours are being displaced by generative AI algorithms.
S-4743 by Senator Warren requires the Office of Financial Research to compel data on AI financing.
Right, so Warren isn't looking at the jobs, she's looking at the money. Wall Street is pouring trillions into AI startups. If the AI bubble bursts, could it trigger a 2008-style financial collapse? This bill gives federal regulators subpoena power to force private equity and hedge funds to disclose exactly how over-leveraged they are in the AI sector.
S-47 King 44 by Senator Moran amends Titles 10 and 38 to improve veteran benefits.
Specifically, it harmonizes the medical discharge records between the Department of Defense, which is Title 10, and the VA Title 38.
Yeah.
So a wounded soldier doesn't have to prove their injuries twice to two different federal agencies just to get their benefits.
S-4745 by Senator Husted designates the Ulysses S. Grant Post Office Building in Georgetown, Ohio.
Post office namings are the bread and butter of local constituent service, anchoring federal presence to local historical figures.
S-4746 from Senator Grassley makes discriminatory conduct by covered platforms unlawful.
This is the Senate's volley in the tech censorship wars. It attempts to define major social media platforms as common carriers, like a telephone company. If passed, it would make it federally illegal for a tech platform to ban a user or throttle their reach based purely on the political viewpoint of their speech.
S-4747 by Senator Ernst authorizes pausing and segmenting payments to prevent fraud.
And here we have the Senate companion to the House's H.R. 8464. It proves that the push to freeze suspicious federal payments has real bicameral momentum, despite the concerns about executive overreach delaying legitimate aid.
Finally, for this section, we have two joint resolutions, SJ-Res 196 and SJ-Res 192. These are discharge petitions to disapprove the Department of Education rule, reimagining and improving student education federal student loan program final regulations. What exactly is a discharge petition?
A discharge petition is a rare, super aggressive legislative mutiny. Normally, a bill has to be approved by a committee before it goes to the floor. But if the committee chairman refuses to hold a vote, lawmakers can file a discharge petition.
Let's force it out.
Exactly. If they get a majority of signatures, the bill is forcefully yanked out of the committee and placed directly on the floor. It shows intense, boiling frustration with the Biden administration's massive overhaul of the student loan forgiveness rules, and lawmakers are demanding a direct up or down vote to stop it.
Let's look at Senate additional co-sponsors. When a senator adds their name to a bill that's already been introduced, it's a massive signal of political momentum. Let's run through the list of bills that picked up support today. S-142, the Wildland Firefighters Gold Medal Bill.
Right, a push to award the Congressional Gold Medal to federal wildland firefighters, recognizing the increasing danger and the year-round nature of what used to be just a seasonal job.
S-1326, to prevent states from interfering with ag products. But notably, a name was withdrawn from this one today.
This is often called the Eat S Act. It's designed to stop states like California from passing animal welfare laws that ban the sale of pork from states with lower standards. A senator withdrawing their name means intense lobbying from animal rights groups or local state rights advocates successfully shifted the political math.
S1404 to combat organized crime regarding retail goods.
Giving federal prosecutors RICO-style tools to go after the sophisticated multi-state syndicates behind the massive smash-and-grab retail thefts rather than just arresting the low-level participants.
S1406 regarding Medicare payment for oxygen.
For patients with severe COPD, current Medicare rules often cap the amount of liquid oxygen they can receive or reimburse at abysmally low rates, leaving patients trapped in their homes. This bill picked up support to radically overhaul the reimbursement algorithm to ensure life-saving mobility.
S1410, removing cost sharing for breast screenings.
Ensuring that not just the initial mammogram, but the incredibly expensive follow-up diagnostic MRIs required when an anomaly is found are covered with zero out-of-pocket copays.
S2343 to amend the Civil Rights Act for disparate impact.
This addresses a thorny legal standard. Disparate impact means a policy isn't explicitly racist on paper, but mathematically harms a minority group in practice. This bill seeks to codify that standard into the Civil Rights Act, making it easier to sue over discriminatory algorithms in housing and lending.
S2376 to include rioting in racketeering.
Expanding the federal RACO statutes, originally designed for the mafia to prosecute individuals who cross state lines to organize and fund violent property destruction during political protests.
S3394, which had a co-sponsor added by Senator Grassley, and then S3398 to criminalize threats to distribute child sexual abuse material.
This closes a horrifying legal loophole. In many jurisdictions, actually distributing the material is a federal crime, but merely threatening to distribute it to extort money from a victim isn't federally covered in the same way. This bill equates the threat with the act itself.
S3900 to promote human rights and internet freedom in Iran.
Providing federal backing and funding for satellite internet uplinks and VPN technologies to help Iranian citizens bypass the regime's digital blackouts during protests.
S4189 to reduce the price of insulin.
Continuing the wildly popular momentum to cap the out-of-pocket cost of insulin, not just for Medicare patients, but for anyone on the private commercial market.
S4464 regarding meat inspection and cell-cultivated protein.
Lab-grown meat is officially here. This bill clarifies the turf war between the FDA and the USDA over who actually has the authority to inspect a bioreactor producing chicken cells, ensuring safety standards for an entirely new food category.
S4467 regarding nursing facility requirements.
Imposing strict federal minimum staffing ratios for registered nurses in any facility accepting Medicaid, directly addressing the horrific neglect seen during recent public health emergencies.
S4528, supporting historically black colleges.
Guaranteeing a baseline of permanent infrastructure and research funding for HBCUs, protecting them from the annual political whims of the budget cycle.
And S-Res 236, calling for the return of abducted Ukrainian children.
A unified, bipartisan diplomatic roar condemning the documented forced relocation of Ukrainian youth into Russian territory, classifying it formally as a crime against humanity.
Okay, let's dive into the granular committee markups. This is where the real legislative sausage is made, where bills are debated line by line before hitting the floor. Let's start with the House Natural Resources Committee. They marked up H.R. 3276, the Local Communities and Bird Habitat Stewardship Act.
This is about voluntary conservation. It provides federal cash to private duck clubs and farmers to deliberately flood their fields during migration seasons, creating temporary wetlands without the government having to permanently seize the land.
H.R. 3925, the Uhaviatum of San Manuel Nation Land Exchange.
Resolving a century-old mapping error. It swaps a piece of federal forestry land for a culturally significant piece of land currently held by the tribe, cleaning up the jurisdictional borders.
H.R. 7882, regarding Carlsbad minerals leasing.
The Carlsbad region in New Mexico sits on massive oil and potash reserves. This markup attempts to mandate regular lease sales to energy companies, circumventing executive branch attempts to pause drilling on public lands.
And H.R. 8686, the Yuma Proving Ground land withdrawal.
The military needs massive tracts of desert to test next-generation artillery. Withdrawal, in this context, means legally removing public lands from potential mining or commercial use and locking it down exclusively for the Department of Defense.
Over to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. They had a marathon session. I want to hit every single one of these. We have S140 on the forest health crisis.
Providing expedited authority for the Forest Service to clear dead timber and underbrush in highly flammable regions without undergoing a 5-year environmental review first.
S332, the Holocaust Education Study. Wait, why is a Holocaust education bill in the Energy Committee?
It's a quirk of how Congress defines property. The bill mandates a study by the National Park Service on how to best memorialize Holocaust education sites. Because the Park Service falls under the Department of the Interior, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee actually has jurisdiction.
Ah, that makes sense. S789 on critical mineral resources. What makes a mineral critical?
Lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements. Things essential for electric vehicle batteries and fighter jets that we currently rely heavily on China for. This bill fast-tracks domestic mining permits for those specific elements,
S1288, the Finger Lakes National Heritage Area.
designating this region in New York to receive federal matching funds for historical preservation and tourism marketing without imposing federal zoning controls.
S2437 and its House companion HR 38557 for snow water supply forecasting.
The entire American West relies on melting snowpack for drinking water and agriculture. This modernizes the airborne laser scanning technology used by the government to accurately predict exactly how much water will flow into the reservoirs each spring.
S2753 regarding urban canals of concern.
Cities built massive concrete canals decades ago for flood control, but many are now crumbling infrastructure hazards. This provides Army Corps of Engineers funding to rehabilitate or safely decommission them.
S3500 and HR 3657 on hydropower relicensing. Why does relicensing a dam take an act of Congress?
Because the current regulatory framework is so convoluted that it can take 10 years and millions of dollars just to renew the paperwork to keep an existing dam running. These bills aim to truncate that timeline to prevent clean energy facilities from shutting down purely due to bureaucracy.
S3518 for micro-hydrokinetic energy.
Instead of giant dams, this focuses on putting small submerged turbines in existing irrigation canals and municipal water pipes to generate electricity from the flow of water we already use.
S3F693 on water recycling and reuse.
Funding massive industrial-scale desalination and wastewater purification plants in drought-stricken states like California and Arizona.
S3743 for selective water withdrawal at Glen Canyon Dam.
As Lake Powell shrinks due to drought, the water hitting the dam's turbines is getting warmer, which devastates native fish downstream. This highly technical bill funds infrastructure to pull colder water from deeper in the reservoir to maintain the ecological balance.
S3792, establishing water project navigators.
Small rural towns often don't have the specialized grant writers needed to apply for the billions in federal water infrastructure money. This bill funds federal navigators, whose sole job is to help poor communities complete the paperwork to get their pipes fixed.
S3878, the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians.
Expanding the boundaries of this historic park in Mississippi to preserve vital indigenous archaeological sites from encroaching commercial development.
S4040, regarding state and tribal water supplies.
Creating a federal backstop to ensure that when states and tribes sign water sharing agreements, the federal government actually funds the reservoirs and pipelines necessary to make those agreements a physical reality.
HR 3872, the Mineral Leasing Act for acquired lands.
Standardizing the royalty rates the federal government charges when private companies extract minerals from lands that the government purchased from private owners rather than lands it has held historically.
And HR 3937, the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest Conveyance.
Selling a very small, isolated parcel of federal forest land in Wisconsin that is too difficult for the government to manage, returning it to local control.
Next up, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. This is global policy in action. S3984 on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Reauthorizing a vital independent watchdog that publicly calls out foreign governments, allies, and adversaries alike who persecute religious minorities.
S4570 regarding cyber and digital tech.
Elevating the State Department's Cyber Diplomacy Office, ensuring the U.S. has a dedicated ambassador negotiating international rules of engagement for cyber warfare.
S4259 for unmanned aerial systems.
Establishing a formal export control regime to prevent American drone technology from being sold to nations that might use it for human rights abuses or proxy wars.
S3018 allowing Taiwan dignitaries to fly their flag. Why is this a Senate issue?
Because of the One China policy, the U.S. does not formally recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. Consequently, Taiwanese diplomats are historically forbidden from displaying their national flag on U.S. government property. This bill is a highly provocative, symbolic upgrade of Taiwan's diplomatic status, sure to enrage Beijing.
S2578 on Brazilian Amazon Prime.
Directing U.S. law enforcement agencies to actively assist Brazilian authorities in tracking and dismantling the transnational criminal syndicates driving illegal deforestation in the Amazon.
S2252, regarding foreign assistance expiration.
Creating strict use it or lose it timelines for foreign aid. If a country fails to meet democratic or anti-corruption benchmarks, the allocated funds automatically expire and return to the U.S. Treasury.
S3050 for FAR exemptions. What is a FARA?
The Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Yeah.
If you lobby the U.S. government on behalf of a foreign country, you must publicly register. But there are blurry exemptions for academic researchers and commercial entities. This bill attempts to close those loopholes to expose hidden foreign influence operations in D.C.
S4610 for geothermal resources in the Pacific.
A strategic push to help Pacific Island nations develop their own geothermal energy, reducing their reliance on expensive imported diesel, and structurally boxing out Chinese infrastructure investments in the region.
S3172 to repeal Syria sanctions.
A deeply controversial debate over whether the crushing economic sanctions meant to punish the Assad regime are actually just starving the civilian population and hindering humanitarian earthquake relief.
S3676 for sports diplomacy.
Authorizing funds for the State Department to use the upcoming World Cup and Olympic Games hosted in North America as strategic soft power events to strengthen global alliances.
S4708 on Arctic security.
As the polar ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening. This bill funds the construction of new deep-water ports and icebreakers to counter Russia's massive militarization of the Arctic Circle.
S4009 regarding China forced organ harvesting.
A horrific human rights focus. This bill imposes absolute blocking sanctions and visa bans on any Chinese official or medical practitioner involved in the state-sponsored extraction of organs from political prisoners.
S1542 for Uyghur human rights.
Expanding the import bans to ensure that absolutely no product made with the forced labor of the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang makes its way into American supply chains.
S439, the AUKUS arms export bill.
AUKUS is the massive security pact between Australia, the UK, and the US. This bill cuts through the incredibly dense web of weapons export laws, allowing the U.S. to seamlessly share highly classified nuclear submarine technology with our closest allies.
S4392 on allied energy and mineral security.
Creating a formalized trade bloc with European and Asian allies to collectively secure supply chains for the critical minerals needed for the green energy transition, bypassing Chinese monopolies.
S4600 regarding the South China Sea.
Imposing mandatory sanctions on Chinese state-owned enterprises that construct artificial militarized islands in the contested waters of the South China Sea.
S4577 for U.S.-Tanzania relations. S4443 on the Eastern Mediterranean. S4723 for Latin America law enforcement. S4680 for consular appointments.
This rapid-fire series shows the sheer breadth of the committee. From elevating democratic partnerships in East Africa to managing the complex Greece-Turkey-Cyprus dynamics in the Mediterranean, to funding anti-cartel operations in Latin America, and simply ensuring the State Department has enough personnel to staff its embassies.
S4665, countering Iranian and Hezbollah influence.
Expanding financial sanctions networks, specifically targeting the shell companies used by Hezbollah to launder money through South America to fund operations in the Middle East.
S3733 regarding passport fees at libraries.
A hyper-local issue on a global committee. Many Americans apply for passports at their local public library. This bill allows the libraries to keep a larger percentage of the processing fee to fund their own local operations.
And S4726, promoting stability in Sudan.
Directing high-level diplomatic intervention and targeted sanctions against the rival generals currently tearing Sudan apart in a devastating civil war.
Finally, for markups, the Senate HLP Committee Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. S1782, the Organ Transplant Disability Bill.
It is shockingly common for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities to be quietly denied life-saving organ transplants based on subjective quality of life assessments. This bill makes that discrimination federally illegal under the ADA.
S3799, the Healthy Start Initiative.
Reauthorizing vital federal funding for community-based programs that specifically target regions with high infant mortality rates, providing prenatal care and maternal support.
S4109, the Stem Cell Therapeutic Act.
Reauthorizing the National Registry for Bone Marrow and Cord Blood Donors, ensuring that patients with blood cancers have a centralized, federally funded database to find genetic matches.
S2339 for breast health education.
Creating targeted grant programs for public awareness campaigns specifically geared toward young women and high-risk minority populations regarding the necessity of early screening.
S4472, the ALS Act.
Unlocking specialized federal funding for early access to experimental treatments and comprehensive home care support for patients diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
S2658 regarding FDA and USPTO information.
This addresses a massive issue called patent thickening. Pharmaceutical companies will constantly tweak a drug slightly and apply for a new patent at the USPTO to prevent cheaper generics from hitting the market without telling the FDA. This bill forces the two agencies to communicate and share data to shut down abusive patent extensions.
S3014 on FDA citizen petitions.
Another pharmaceutical trick. Brand-name drug companies often file frivolous citizen petitions with the FDA raising fake safety concerns about a generic competitor, purely to delay the generic's approval by a few months. This bill empowers the FDA to summarily reject these sham petitions and fine the companies.
And S1954 for the interchangeability of biological products.
Biologics are incredibly expensive drugs made from living cells. Currently, the FDA requires a higher redundant standard of proof for a cheaper biosimilar to be deemed fully interchangeable with the brand name version at the pharmacy counter. This bill streamlines that science-based standard, instantly lowering costs for patients at the pharmacy.
Okay, we have a final stack of heavily detailed executive summaries and referenced acts. These showcase broader policy goals. S1318, the Fallen Service Members' Religious Heritage Restoration Act.
After World War II, many Jewish American service members buried in American military cemeteries overseas were mistakenly buried under crosses rather than the Star of David due to chaotic battlefield record-keeping, or because the soldiers intentionally hid their religion to avoid Nazi execution if captured. This act forces the military to actively investigate and correct those headstones, restoring their true religious heritage.
Then we have two water rights acts, S564, the Zuni Indian Tribe Water Rights Settlement Act, and S563, the Oke-Owenja-Riu Chama Water Rights Settlement Act.
These are historic. The federal government has spent decades locked in litigation regarding its failure to protect the water rights of these Pacific pueblos in New Mexico. These acts finally codify the settlements, appropriating hundreds of millions to build the pipelines, dams, and treatment plants necessary to deliver the wet water they are legally owed.
HRIS 1342, National Gun Violence Awareness Day.
A resolution honoring Hadia Pendleton, a teenager tragically shot in Chicago. It designates June 5th to raise awareness and encourages communities to wear orange, turning a localized tragedy into a national call for preventative policy.
HRS 1336 is a procedural waiver of the two-thirds same-day rule for budget reconciliation. What does that actually mean?
Normally, House rules require a waiting period between when a massive bill is presented and when it can be voted on, unless two-thirds of the House agrees to speed it up. This resolution is a brute force procedural maneuver by the majority party to waive that rule with a simple majority, allowing them to ram through a massive budget bill on the exact same day it's printed, denying the opposition time to read it.
Now, H.R. 8914, the No Taxpayer-Funded Settlement Slush Funds Act of 2026. This explicitly blocks federal funds from being used for a specific settlement in the case of Trump v. IRS. And again, maintaining our objectivity, just looking at the mechanics, how can Congress do this?
It is a stunning flex of constitutional power. Under the Constitution, no money can be drawn from the Treasury without an appropriation by Congress. Usually, Congress funds the judgment fund generally. But here, Congress is using its absolute power of the purse to write a law explicitly forbidding the executive branch from writing a settlement check for one specific, highly political lawsuit. It is the ultimate legislative veto over executive branch litigation.
H.R. 8800 is the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027.
The NDAA. It is the center of gravity for Congress. It doesn't just fund the military. It dictates everything from global troop deployments to the exact number of F-35 fighter jets we will purchase to housing allowances for enlisted personnel. It is a massive must-pass behemoth.
H.R. 8646 provides appropriations for agriculture, rural development, and the FDA.
Another vital pillar. This funds the SNAP Food Stamp program, rural broadband deployment, and the food safety inspectors that keep the meatpacking industry running.
H.R. 2913, the Ukraine Support Act.
Cementing a comprehensive multi-year framework for diplomatic, economic, and security assistance to Kyiv, while codifying crippling permanent sanctions against the Russian financial sector to ensure the executive branch can't unilaterally loosen them.
And the last item on our massive legislative checklist, H.R. 1346, the Nationwide Consumer and Fuel Retailer Choice Act of 2025. This extends the Reed vapor pressure waiver to E15 ethanol blends. Okay, Reed vapor pressure sounds like thermodynamics. What does this mean at the gas pump?
It's all about smog. Reed vapor pressure, or RVP, is a measure of how easily fuel evaporates. In the heat of summer, fuel evaporates faster, creating smog. So the EPA strictly limits the RVP of gasoline from June to September. But ethanol derived from corn actually increases the vapor pressure of fuel. So E15, which is a 15% ethanol blend, historically couldn't be sold in the summer.
Because it violated the smog rules.
Right. This bill legally changes that. It grants a permanent, nationwide waiver overriding those specific environmental regulations to allow E15 to be sold year-round. It is a massive victory for the agricultural lobby and corn growers, showcasing how environmental science is often bent by agricultural economics.
We did it. We got through the entire stack, every single bill, resolution, and markup. But understanding the text is only half the battle. Let's move into the political dynamics. If we connect this dry, methodical text to the actual human behavior on the floor today, the contrast is jarring.
The floor is where the policy becomes theater. Let's look at the House.
We mentioned Representative Hageman's speech against climate shakedowns. But we also had Representative Congressnal giving a speech characterizing Donald Trump's sleeping habits in meetings as a national security vulnerability. We had Representative Latimer mocking the White House's spending priorities, specifically calling out funding for an MMA stadium and a ballroom. And Representative Wilson praised the strict border security metrics under the previous Trump administration compared to the current numbers. And to be clear, our goal here isn't to validate or invalidate these arguments. We are looking at the temperature of the room.
And that temperature is boiling. The House floor speeches are rarely designed to persuade colleagues. They are designed to be clipped, put on social media, and used for fundraising. The rhetoric is sharp, personalized, and deeply partisan because House members represent smaller, more ideologically pure districts.
Over in the Senate, the vibe was entirely different. We looked at Senator Hickenlooper's speech. He did a retrospective on climate change, and he centered it entirely around a statistic, tracking the rise of atmospheric CO2 from 348 parts per million 40 years ago to over 404 ppm today.
Notice the difference. He wasn't making a personalized attack. He was establishing a historical and scientific baseline to argue for the systemic reforms we saw in the Senate Energy Committee today.
And Senator Durbin gave a genuinely stark warning about the 2032 Social Security solvency cliff. He pointed out that if Congress literally does nothing, the trust fund will deplete, and by law, beneficiaries are looking at an automatic 22% cut. That's roughly $455 a month vanished from a senior's fixed income.
Which is an absolute political nightmare. Durbin's speech perfectly highlights the Senate's structural preference for identifying long-term systemic cliffs, even if they struggle to pass the solutions.
So we have this high-flying rhetoric, but we also have actual partisan warfare blocking legislation. The prime example today is the standoff over FISA Section 702. Democratic Senator Wyden and Republican Senator Cornyn went head-to-head on the floor.
This is a clash of fundamental, irreconcilable values. Wyden demands a strict, probable cause warrant before the government can query Americans' communications. He views it as a non-negotiable constitutional Fourth Amendment protection. He argues that without a warrant, it's essentially a massive, illegal domestic spying program.
And Cornyn's argument?
Cornyn vehemently objects on operational grounds. He argues that the intelligence is already lawfully collected from foreign targets. If you force an analyst to stop and find a judge to sign a warrant just to search the database for an American's phone number who might be talking to a terrorist, the program will go dark. He argues that delay poses an immediate, fatal risk to national security.
But amidst that clash, we did see glimmers of bipartisanship. You pointed out Durbin's cross-party work?
Yes. Durbin, a Democrat, was explicitly working with Republican Senators Cassidy and Tillis, along with Senator Kaine, to build a working group on that Social Security cliff. It proves that while the cameras capture the fighting over FISA behind the scenes, serious lawmakers are quietly trying to build the complex math required to save entitlement programs.
Let's pull back even further for our context and analysis segment. How does today's chaos fit into the grand timeline of how Congress is supposed to work?
To understand the present, look at the tributes paid today. Senator Moran gave a moving speech recognizing the 30th anniversary of Bob Dole's farewell to the Senate. Moran reflected heavily on Dole's inherent optimism and his legendary capacity to find common ground and forge compromises.
It almost felt melancholic, contrasting Dole's era of grand bargains with today's piecemeal gridlock. And Senator Hickenlooper did something similar, marking 40 years since Republican Senator John Chafee held urgent bipartisan hearings on climate change.
Exactly. It reminds us that issues which are completely hyperpartisan today, like environmental regulations, were historically addressed with broad, cross-aisle engagement.
Let's talk about the mechanics of how things get blocked. We talked about Senator Cornyn's stopping Senator Wyden's FISA reforms instantly. The mechanism he used is called unanimous consent. I like to explain it this way. Imagine a group of 100 friends trying to decide on what to eat for dinner. If 99 people say pizza, but even one single person says no, the entire plan halts and nobody eats. That is unanimous consent in the Senate.
It is the ultimate veto power for an individual senator. The Senate runs on scheduling agreements. To move quickly, everyone must agree to skip the debate. If one senator objects, as Cornyn did, the bill is thrown back into a morass of procedural hurdles that can take weeks to overcome.
Okay, what does all of this mean for tomorrow? Let's dive into future implications.
The pressure cooker's only getting hotter. The most immediate threat is the July 2, 2026 deadline for FISA Section 702. The House tried to buy time with their extension, but the Senate is deadlocked over the warrant requirement. If they don't find a compromise, the legal authority for the intelligence community's primary data collection tool simply vanishes at midnight.
And then we have the 2032 Social Security cliff. Congress has exactly 6 years to prevent that $455 a month cut to seniors. 6 years sounds like a long time.
In legislative years, for an entitlement program that touches every single American, 6 years means they are practically out of time. Any solution requires raising taxes, cutting benefits, or changing the retirement age, all of which are politically toxic. Furthermore, the massive funding bills we discussed, like the NDAA 2027 and the agricultural appropriations, are just now entering the grueling committee process where thousands of amendments will be fought over.
Are there broader structural trends we should be watching?
Absolutely. The most defining trend of modern legislating is the attachment of vast, completely unrelated policy riders into massive reconciliation packages. We saw this with S2, the Secure America Act.
Why do they do that? Is it because reconciliation bills bypass the filibuster?
Precisely. Under Senate rules, a standard bill needs 60 votes to break a filibuster. But a budget reconciliation bill only needs a simple majority of 51 votes. Because 60 votes is nearly impossible in a polarized Senate, leadership takes all their major policy goals, claims they are budgetary, and rams them into these massive trillion-dollar omnibus packages. It breaks the traditional process of debating individual ideas on their own merits.
I have to ask, are these deadlines like the FISA expiration or the Social Security cliff, are they actual existential cliffs, or are they just political speed bumps designed to force midnight deals?
It's a dangerous mix of both. The legal authority truly does stop, and the money truly does run out. But politically, leadership relies on the terror of the cliff. They intentionally wait until the 11th hour, hoping the fear of a shutdown or an intelligence failure will force the other side to capitulate and drop their demands. It's a massive game of legislative chicken.
Which brings us to our closing segment, citizen engagement. You've survived the deep dive. We've unpacked the entire day. Now, how do you actually get involved?
The absolute best tool at your disposal is Congress.gov. We deliberately read every single alphanumeric code today, from HR 9238 to S4738. You can go to that website, type in those exact codes, and read the raw text for yourself. You can see who sponsors it, who co-sponsors it, and track exactly which committee is holding it up.
And once you find something you care about, whether it's the Stop Secret Spending Act, the tribal water rights settlements, or the agricultural appropriations, you need to contact your representatives. But don't just call the D.C. office. Call their local district office. They tally those calls. Tell them specifically what bill number you are tracking and why it matters to your local community.
And participation goes beyond voting or calling. When executive agencies propose new rules, like the HHS child care rule or the Department of Education loan rules we saw lawmakers fighting today, those agencies are legally required to hold public comment periods. You can submit your expertise directly to the agency. You can attend local town halls, read the committee markups, understand the why behind the legislation, not just the talking points you see on television.
As we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Think about all the chaos, the gridlock, the standoffs, and the seemingly endless procedural delays we discussed today. What if the intense legislative backlog we see in Congress is not a bug in the system? What if it's a feature? A feature intentionally designed by the founders to make it nearly impossible for one narrow faction to rule unilaterally. It forces the system to slow down, demanding ultimate, exhausting compromise before the power of the federal government can be brought to bear on the public.
We started today looking at the murky, complex waters of Capitol Hill. But maybe wading through that mud, arguing over every single bill, committee markup, and writer is the only way a democracy this massive and diverse actually survives. Keep diving deep into your sources, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll see you next time on Congress in Context.